'Twas the season of giving, yet something wasn't right, as control and manipulation dimmed Christmas's light. Though the coffers were full with needs amply met, each purchase for children was met with regret. The morning arrived with such sparkle and cheer, but father delayed, making children wait here. Not yet, he would say, with timing precise, his power displayed through this holiday vice. His own gifts lay waiting, wrapped in such care, but he'd refuse them completely, causing such despair. I want nothing, he'd claim, yet judge others' desires, while guilt-tripping wishes stoked emotional fires. Last-minute shopping done just for show, no thought or connection in gifts he'd bestow. The children, though willing to shop for their mother, found no help from father, their wishes to smother. At holiday parties, a curious sight, his mood would transform like day into night. Beforehand, so bitter, resistant to go, then charming and social, putting on quite a show. But homeward bound, darkness would settle once more, his temperament changing right after the door. Even cookies for neighbors would cause him to fret. Our food given away? A controlling threat? Till finally exhausted from emotional strain, each family member sought refuge from pain. To screens they retreated, this holiday crew, while visions of peace remained far from view. But remember, dear readers, as this tale you digest, that growth and awareness can put pain to rest, for patterns once hidden, when finally clear, can lead us to healing throughout the new year. So that story, obviously, was written in the style of Twas the Night Before Christmas, and it was created by my friend Claude. That's Claude.ai, one of the AI programs that I enjoy using to add more creative flair to my content. But what makes that particularly interesting is that it was generated from a listener's note about a different type of cut, a holiday cut, if you will, of the death by 1,000 cuts variety. And we're not talking about your standard paper cut from a 8.5 by 11 inch sheet of paper. Instead, we're dealing with cuts from wrapping paper, maybe gift tags, maybe even pine needles, even packaging, all of them, which have the potential to inflict harm during the holiday season. And this harm might be emotional or spiritual or financial or otherwise. And honestly, it's not just limited to the holidays, or this holiday, the Christmas holidays, or New Year's. It could be birthdays, it could be Arbor Day, President's Day, any day. It could actually happen at night or in the morning or mid-morning, or any time basically can become a moment when somebody might be made to question their own sanity or their own reality. But today's focus will be on the holidays, Christmas in particular. Hey everybody, welcome to Waking Up to Narcissism. This is episode 128. I am your host, Tony Overbay. I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist. And thank you, as always now, to Riley Hope for her anthem, Not My Job. And you can find a link to all of Riley's music in the show notes, or just look Riley Hope up wherever you listen to music. And I have a brand new website that's finally been unveiled. Go to tonyoverbay.com, sign up there to get my newsletter, and please follow me on social media at virtual.couch on Instagram, at virtualcouch on TikTok, or Tony Overbay, licensed marriage and family therapist on Facebook. I would love it if you would go watch this on YouTube, hit the subscribe button, and feel free to leave a review wherever you listen to podcasts. I mentioned earlier this year a men's group called the Emotional Architects, and there has been a couple of false starts. But in 2025, we're talking early 2025, you will see the beginning of an incredible men's group. So whether you are the pathologically kind male or the guy waking up to his own narcissistic traits or tendencies, I would encourage you to please reach out and just let me know. I still have the emails from those of you who already wrote in. You'll hear from me soon, but if you would like to, feel free to just check in with me again, just in case, because I would love to have you be a part of that group. And for women who are navigating emotionally immature or narcissistic relationships of any type, I do have a private women's Facebook group that is amazing. So please reach out to me and let me know if you're interested in joining that. And check out the Virtual Couch Patreon at patreon.com/virtualcouch. There's a lot more there coming soon. And email me with any questions or comments about anything around emotional maturity, narcissism, relationships. And right now, I'm really looking in particular for things regarding faith and mixed faith marriages, people who are going through faith journeys, faith crises, and what that looks like from a narcissistic or an emotionally immature lens. I welcome those stories as well. And before I dive right into the stories, I put this call out for stories about the holidays to my listeners, as well as on a couple of the social media outlets, and to the women in my private Facebook group, wanting these specific holiday types of cuts or stories. And the responses I received were, I was going to say predominantly from women. They were all from women this go round. But I do want to take a moment and acknowledge that I think there's something really important. And I know from my clinical practice and from the emails that I will get in often that there are plenty of men out there that are dealing with narcissistic and extremely emotionally immature female partners. And I think there's a pretty fascinating part about that dynamic. And it can actually it can actually be more challenging in some ways when you're that pathologically kind male in the relationship, because a lot of the gender stereotypes and the societal stereotypes of that it can't be that the guy is the one that is being emotionally or even physically or financially, spiritually abused. A lot of guys are going through nice guy syndrome, and where they will just continue to take it, to suck it up, to try to just continue to try to go perform and make more and do more so that people will like them. But that doesn't typically fit the narrative that we hear about, because most of the stories that I know that I do tend to feature are about the pathologically kind woman in relationships with narcissistic or extremely emotionally immature men. But I really do just want to emphasize, and I can't say it clearly enough, that this relationship dynamic, what Ross Rosenberg calls the human magnet syndrome, which I highly recommend that book, it is not limited by gender or orientation. It comes in all shapes and sizes, all configurations that you can imagine. And I mean this sincerely. I really do want to hear from more of you out there, whether you're the pathologically kind male in the dynamic, or if you're in a same gender relationship dealing with these patterns, or maybe you're somebody who's waking up to your own narcissistic tendencies or emotional immaturity, that I want you to know I see you. This is the work that I do. I really enjoy helping people understand this in themselves and what's happening in their relationships. And I hear you, and your stories matter just as much. So do not hesitate to write in with your experiences, your questions, your journeys, your poems, your songs, because this isn't just about one type of relationship or one type of person. I see you, and your voice definitely deserves to be heard in this conversation. So with that said, let's dive right into the stories that will make up today's episode. All right, story number 1. My husband's relationship with Christmas revealed deep patterns around control, particularly through money. Despite having sufficient means for both needs and wants, he exhibited extreme resistance to spending money on Christmas gifts for our kids. He would deliberately delay Christmas morning gift opening, making the children wait unnecessarily. His own relationship with receiving gifts was equally challenging. He'd refuse to accept presents. He would make everybody beg him to participate, while simultaneously making me feel guilty for wanting anything myself. By the way, this is the story that I used to generate the Twas the Night Before Christmas story at the beginning of today's episode. She went on to say, if he did shop for me, it was last minute and without consideration for my interests or my desires, and he never facilitated our children's ability to give me gifts either, leaving me feeling forgotten during what should be a season of giving. His behavior at holiday parties followed a distinct pattern. He'd resist attending, act terribly beforehand, then transform into a social butterfly at the event, then revert to hostile behavior on the way home. He even criticized my gesture of sharing Christmas cookies with the neighbors, framing it as giving away all our food. By the end of the gift opening, the emotional toll would leave everybody to retreat into their electronic devices for the remainder of the day. Thank you for sharing. And I know this one's going to resonate with a lot of people. And I think that this is one of those situations that I hesitate to use the word beautifully, but beautifully illustrates how emotionally immature behaviors can permeate every aspect of holiday celebrations. Because we can see that control over money and time and even the cookie distribution becomes a way to manage whatever his deep-seated insecurities are. That putting himself out there, being willing to let go of some of that control feels too scary. And so then instead, he will manage everybody, everything, every ingredient, every penny that comes in, also every emotion, whether it's the anger of going to a party, but then when I'm there, I need to manage the room and make sure everybody knows that I'm an amazing human being. That deep-seated insecurity is really about this fear and this need for control, because the uncertainty is just so scary. Look at the delayed gift opening. It's not really about timing. That's about power, because the resistance to receiving gifts, simultaneously failing to give, and especially give thoughtfully, reveals something profound about his emotional capacity. It's too much going on. And then when you see this stark contrast between public and private behavior, that's really, really telling, because it lacks emotional consistency. It's hard to find where that would be operating from any kind of a place of integrity, because you may be telling yourself you're this amazing human being, right, guys? Looking behind you, nobody's there. So out in public, this is the public persona I'm gonna put out there. But then at home, I'm frustrated and mad because people are giving away all our chocolate chips and they're spending all my money. And how dare you get mom a super thoughtful gift when that I don't think that you've done that for me. So in public settings where it's about optics, where the brain just perceives this need to maintain image, then he can access his more regulated behavior. And I think often that's even more frustrating for people to see, because if he can do that out in public, why on earth can't he do it at home? Because in private, where that external pressure is removed, well, now it's time for the emotional immaturity to resurface. and, I don't know, put on a bathrobe and just stroll around the house. It's about patterns of behavior that stem from his own nature and nurture and abandonment and attachment and all those experiences from his youth. But the impact on kids and on the entire family dynamic, I think, is significant. Because when holidays end up not just being this time where you get to enjoy and give and celebrate and be free, when holidays become these exercises and happen to even further regulate your emotions rather than celebrate, then I think that's what we see described in what this woman talked about. Family members start to retreat to individual coping mechanisms like their electronics. And I think this is why maybe you see an uptick in unhealthy coping mechanisms during the holidays, because the brain starts to then seek safety through distraction if the connection in the family feels too threatening. So rather than this being this amazing, wonderful time, then it becomes a time where vices and coping mechanisms are further on display or actually hidden into the shadows, because then people get to beat themselves up and say, what's wrong with me? I look on social media, everybody else seems to be having fun at Christmas. Just remember that recognizing these patterns is part of growth. Starting to acknowledge that, okay, I'm not alone, or that's what I've experienced in my own home. Because you don't know what you don't know until something or someone helps you see it more clearly. Every interaction that you're going to hear today, every story can act as a bit of a muse, teaching you about yourself, what you want or need in relationships. You might even hear things and think, oh, mine's not that bad. You're going to have opinions that are going to come up from what you hear today. The awareness that you're starting to show isn't just an observation. This is the beginning of differentiation, of understanding how these patterns affect you. They can impact your family, your children, and potentially this can be the first step toward creating holiday experiences that align more with your values or your wants or your needs. I've got 5 or 6 more of these examples today, and I encourage you to sit back, relax, and just take them in and see what that brings up for you. Maybe even jot down some notes, talk to your therapist about them, email me with questions, and we can even do a follow-up episode on, all right, what do I do next if this is what's happening in my dynamic? Here's an example that I think really captures how emotional immaturity can throw an entire shadow over the holiday celebrations. Another listener said, before I understood narcissism, and then I'll just add a little asterisk and say, or extreme emotional immaturity, I had actually given a name to my husband's holiday demeanor. I called it his Christmas face. It was this distinct expression, like somebody had just harmed his beloved pet. I began to notice a pattern of him seeming to despise all holidays. Concerned about how this affected our children, I started creating separate holiday experiences without him present, just so they could experience pure joy without walking on eggshells. And you can see the dynamic that the emotionally immature can create in the home, where even their not being there can impact the family, because I'm sure that people, while they want to be present with whatever these holiday celebrations are, they're still living in fear that when dad finds out, how's he going to take it? Then do we have to start keeping secrets? We want to be able to be open, especially about things like celebrations or holidays. She said this year, things escalated when he had an explosive outburst the day before Thanksgiving with his family. Through support from others, I've made some important realizations. I've even decided to stop sending Christmas cards, something I previously loved doing, because I'm no longer willing to maintain the facade that everything is fine. Somebody pointed out that my tendency to keep up appearances might actually enable his behavior. Since he's highly invested in maintaining his public image, my role in upholding this false reality isn't serving anybody's growth. Now that takes a lot of emotional maturity just to even be aware or be willing to do a little self-confrontation like that. That word enabler can be a really emotionally charged word, because I think often if I were to say to somebody, hey, you're an enabler in my office, it can feel like an accusation or a judgment of their character. But I think if we can look at things like our behavior can actually be enabling the unhealthy behaviors of others, well, now we can look at it with a little bit more curiosity. With this example, I think it's one of these where, again, when you start to recognize things that you previously didn't see, you don't know what you don't know. Once she sees how she moved from trying to manage somebody else's emotions, creating separate celebrations, maintaining appearances, to now recognizing how these adaptations might actually be maintaining these unhealthy patterns. And I know there's a fine line there of wanting to create these experiences and really understanding or believing strongly that it would not be a very positive experience to try to convince somebody that doesn't want to participate, like her husband, to now get on board and be excited. Because if he's truly this emotionally immature person with narcissistic traits and tendencies, right up to full-blown narcissistic personality disorder, if you tell him this is what I would like to do, now you've provided that attack surface. You now said, hey, here's what I want to do. And then to the immature narcissistic person, they hear that as, oh, you think your thing is better than mine? Well, I know what to do with that. I will now knock you down a peg, put you in the one down position, me in the one up. and I can go back about my business. But now, meanwhile, you're emotionally destroyed. But back to the brain being a don't get killed device, I think it often convinces us that keeping the peace and maintaining the status quo is the safest option because it does keep the waters calm. But I don't know, a boat is not going to get anywhere on these calm seas. Sometimes we got to add a little bit of turbulence, some waves in there, because remember that growth comes from discomfort. So when she mentioned stopping Christmas cards, that is an example of being differentiated, making a choice based on a personal truth rather than on the external pressures. And sure, a lot of people might be listening to this and thinking, okay, well, just send out a picture or write. I guess no one's going to suggest probably, hey, actually things stink. My husband's incredibly emotionally immature. Quite frankly, he probably won't even read this message because it doesn't have anything to do with him. Or if he does, well, then you're probably not going to get this and you'll just get a picture. But this story, though, it just shows, I think, so much how our early attachment experiences, what we've seen modeled, can start to impact our relationships. Because many of us learned early on, incorrectly, unfortunately, that we're the ones that are responsible for managing other people's emotions or maintaining a family image, these optics that we were talking about earlier. But part of emotional maturity is recognizing when these learned behaviors no longer serve us or our children. And it's about we're not broken, we're human, and we're going through these experiences. And so I think often, and this is a process, but some of the most loving things that we can do, both for ourselves and others, is to stop participating in patterns that keep everybody stuck, that keep everyone still just floundering in this emotionally immature dynamic in the family system. Okay, let's keep this going. Another person wrote in and said, my final Christmas with my ex-husband revealed a pattern I can now recognize clearly. My son had planned an incredibly thoughtful combination Christmas and 50th birthday gift for me, a dream trip to Europe. He presented it beautifully, giving me a travel book with an inscription detailing a week-long adventure that he arranged for me and my best friend of forever, who was also my ex's godmother. I always want to say fairy godmother, but I don't think that's always the case. The moment I read the details aloud at my son's house, my ex's demeanor changed dramatically. He completely withdrew from the celebration and began making excuses to leave. Later that evening, he called my son in a rage, accusing him of betrayal for giving me this gift without consulting him first. He actually told my son, I can't believe you would do this to me. Stop right there. So I can't believe you, son, would do this to me, father, of giving mom a gift with her best friend, a gift of a lifetime. When I eventually learned about this conversation and confronted him, he tried to justify his reaction by saying, can't you at least admit he should have asked me about the dates? But I stood firm and I explained that this gift had nothing to do with him. The conflict continued throughout the holiday week, culminating in him abruptly canceling our planned 8-hour trip to visit our daughter. However, I decided to make that journey alone and found joy in the one-on-one time with her. When I returned home, I finally acknowledged that this behavior was systematically destroying my love for him, piece by piece. This so shows how emotional immaturity can still exist post-divorce. This ex-husband, I think his brain goes into threat detection mode when he's faced with the situation that he can't control. Because his reaction wasn't about this trip to Europe, it was about his inability to handle not being the center of the narrative. And what I think is so fascinating about this moment, why I think this serves as a very powerful muse, is that through this experience, she learned something profound about herself and about her relationship. In this case, she couldn't unsee how her ex-husband's emotional immaturity was now manifesting in ways that threatened to dim her joy and then even her children's ability to express love through meaningful gifts. I think it shows how the need to become differentiated, the need to know that is a him thing becomes so important, because with the lack of that differentiation, now all of a sudden his butthurtedness, it's not a psychology term in the DSM, but his butthurtedness is what is getting in the way. It can actually impact and ruin everyone else's experience, the gift giver, the gift receiver. There's I've had examples of people that have talked about how now in this situation, the emotionally immature will most likely now make sure that something dramatic happens before they leave on the trip, trying to just derail someone else's experience because all eyes are not on them. And so I think it's a beautiful example of differentiation in action, because despite the pressure, the emotional manipulation, what did she do? Maintained a boundary. And especially on that example of the trip to visit her daughter, she refused to let his behavior control her choices. Now that is growth. That's recognizing that while we can't control others' reactions, we can absolutely take a pause and then choose how we respond to them. And she has a phrase in there at the end, killing my love piece by piece. And I think that is poignant, because it shows how emotional immaturity creates the death by 1,000 cuts in relationships, because it's not usually one big event that ends things. It's this accumulated weight of just these countless moments where one person's inability to manage their own emotions creates chaos for everybody around them. And it impacts and infects the relationship. And it's about recognizing patterns that no longer serve us and making choices that align with our own value of, maybe it's a value of connection, a value of travel, a value of adventure, which then leads to raising our own emotional baseline, our own well-being. And sometimes the most emotionally mature thing that we can do is acknowledge when a relationship dynamic is getting in the way of me, or even in her scenario, her son, growing into their best selves. Okay, let me jump into another example. Last Christmas became a turning point in my understanding of emotional abuse and narcissism. My son was just 11 months old, and I was working extensive hours in the hospital lab due to staffing shortages. One day I came home to discover photos of my son's first visit with Santa placed on our couch. The pain of missing this milestone moment was overwhelming. When I questioned whether my husband had intentionally excluded me from this experience as a retaliation for my work schedule, his response was explosive. Through the fog of what I now recognize as disassociation, certain comments stand out clearly in my memory. He told me to, quote, put my big girl panties on and stop taking naps. This despite my having autoimmune disorder while managing overtime and work, as well as the household duties, childcare, holiday preparations, and gift shopping. He criticized my housekeeping priorities, mocked my constant running of the washer and dryer while neglecting our pets, our animals, and he accused me of ignoring our son by being, quote, glued to my phone, and claimed that our son would always choose him over me if he was given the choice. At the time, these accusations left me feeling worthless, like I was failing as a mother, as a pet owner, as a wife. And it wasn't until I began therapy and I learned about narcissistic patterns that I recognized these comments for what they likely were, projections of his own insecurities. And this also shows where people can often feel like the relationship, it isn't bad, it's okay. Or people want to say that early on in the relationship, I don't think things were as tense as they were. But then eventually they become more tense, or you start to see this emotional immaturity exhibited more because you go through experiences in life that unpack these experiences, like having a kid, or going through financial difficulties, or the loss of someone in the family, or a move. But you don't know how you're going to react to things until you are in that situation. And then it's going to unpack a lot of these feelings and emotions, or an inability to deal with these feelings and emotions. So in the scenario, when he was now confronted with his wife's legitimate feelings of loss over missing their son's first Santa visit, instead of showing empathy and care, concern, compassion, just being able to acknowledge, hey, I can understand that would be hard, and I am so sorry. And hey, let's go again. I mean, he's 11 months old. He's probably not going to remember this one. But instead, he has an attack response to her trying to share her feelings and emotions. Because sometimes, I think, unfortunately, it does take moments of profound pain to then illuminate these patterns that we couldn't see before. And when she mentioned the disassociation, this is not a client of mine. I can't diagnose what was happening there. But I think what she is speaking to is her body's wisdom. It's almost this protective response to becoming emotionally overwhelmed. And then I do think this also shows that textbook example of how shame operates is that childhood defense mechanism. Because if you notice how the accusations touched on core aspects of identity, motherhood, home management, pet ownership, basic competence, these weren't just random criticisms. I believe that they were the buttons that he knew to push to get her to react, so that then he could say, see, look at you, and not have to deal with his own stuff. So they tap into these deep-seated fears and insecurities that many of us carry from our early attachment experiences. But I do think that probably the most powerful part of this story is the transformation. If you take it from this perspective of her going to therapy, her receiving education around emotional maturity and narcissism, and that once she has that information, she does see things a lot more clear. Because when we understand emotional immaturity, then I think we'll often see that it does manifest itself in projection. Somebody that is putting their own fears and their own inadequacies on other people. And we can start to then separate our true selves from this distorted mirror that maybe somebody else is holding up to us. Because that's a them thing. I remember one time a friend of mine was talking about his wife would continually say, well, I don't believe you. You're not being honest. And he truly was one of the more honest people that I think I've known or interacted with. But his then at the time wife was very dishonest. But there was always a reason. Well, yeah, but, or it was just that, or you don't understand, or I didn't mean to, or they made me do it. Always this projection or not taking ownership of her own part. But I thought was really fascinating was then here's what that projection or that emotionally immature projection can look like. She is aware that she's not very honest, or she's saying things to get out of her discomfort, or maybe she's not completely aware. Maybe it's just buried in the subconscious. But the belief is that, well, everybody does that because everybody must do that to make me feel like it's okay that I do that. So I'm sure that he does that. So now I'm projecting onto him, well, you're obviously not being honest. But then he, because honesty was such an important value to him, that was the right button to push that would cause him to lose his mind. And then she, to her mind, says, see, if you were being honest, you wouldn't react that way. So you can see where that dynamic, that projection is pushing the button that can get our partner to react. And then the person that just pushed the button can sit back and they feel somewhat justified or validated because, see, okay, they're obviously not being honest as well. Once again, it is a fantastic reason to learn how to become differentiated. If I know that I'm being honest, if I live a life of integrity and honesty, then if that person says, well, you're not being honest, well, I know I am. So tell me more. What is this? What are you seeing that you feel is not being honest? Because I want to self-reflect. I want to leave room for this flexible sense of self because I've got a pretty solid sense of self. But the only way I'm going to really learn myself better is in interactions with others. But what if we're starting from this point where, but we're good, I'm good, but tell me what you're seeing. But then what if, I don't know, 90% of the time, that answer that you're going to have, whether it's internally or you're saying this out loud, is thank you, period. Or I appreciate that, period. Or I will take a look at that, period. Meaning I don't have to justify myself because I know myself. She talks more also about this feeling of being destroyed by these accusations, then recognizing them as projections. And I think that shows the growth. It shows this shift. It shows a move toward becoming more differentiated because you're starting to reclaim what would be your locus of control. You are in charge of your own thoughts, feelings, emotions, behavior. And so understanding that somebody else's emotional immaturity doesn't define your worth as a parent, a partner, a person, a pet owner. That isn't just growth. Now we're into the world of transformation. This one's a little shorter, but man, I got to get somebody offset. Give me my soapbox and get the wind machine ready because I think I have something that I'm going to really say. I'm going to say go off on that. Sounds very dramatic. I don't think I'm very dramatic of a person. This person says, during Christmas, my ex would refuse to participate in gift shopping and then spend Christmas Day pouting and making passive-aggressive comments about it being excluded from, quote, all the decisions. Every New Year's followed a similar pattern. He'd sleep most of the day, deliberately delaying our arrival at my family's celebration. When I finally decided to attend without him one year, he responded by texting hurtful messages throughout the day that left me crying throughout the evening while he punched holes in the walls at home. Quick therapeutic commentary, and then we'll get the soapbox and the wind machine. Notice that pattern of creating a situation by refusing to participate, then playing the victim when excluded, and then escalating the behavior to punch holes in the wall, punish any attempt at a healthy boundary. That is not what the holidays are about. This is about control. Because when somebody becomes emotionally activated like this, their brain, this don't get killed device that I think that's a good thing to be aware of, can lead them to choose the familiarity of destructive patterns over the uncertainty of what healthy participation would look like. And this shift from emotional manipulation to then physical aggression, when he lost control, shows exactly why setting boundaries, while necessary, does require consideration and safety and why it can be so difficult. And to the person who wrote in with this, you are recognizing these patterns. That's the first step toward eventually reclaiming some of this holiday joy, which probably seems very far out of reach right now. But here's what I want to say to this. To any of you that are punching holes in walls, don't do that. Knock it off. There's no reason. That is such an emotionally immature little kid reaction. That's like kicking your ball over the fence. It's breaking your bat. It's breaking your friend's, I don't know, Barbie doll. That is emotional immaturity. Your 5-year-old self that was not told how to use their big kid words, or they were not given space to feel their emotions. They weren't allowed to feel sad or to feel angry or frustrated or cold or hungry or anything. Even from the good parent who would tell them, hey, it's not that bad. Or the parent that I saw dragging their kid out of Coldwell's barbecue a few weeks ago who was saying, you're not cold and you're not hungry, to the little girl who looked like she had goosebumps on her and were going into a restaurant. I would imagine she was both cold and hungry. We need to be allowed to feel our feelings and let our kids feel their feelings and name their emotions, help them understand what's going on inside of their own little minds and their own little bodies. Because what happens then is I think that their little bodies make a little imprint And they say, okay, I feel this, but I know that I shouldn't be, or it's wrong. But do me a solid, me. When you grow up and be a big kid and you have these feelings and emotions, then you can do something about it because you'll be an adult. You'll be in a human form. You'll probably be able to drive. You might have a little extra money that you can go get therapy or take a course or do something. So then when the adult human feels all of a sudden so misunderstood, so misheard, they feel enraged. That is the cue where the little kid version of them is saying, the inner child inside of them is going, okay, let's not kick the ball over the fence of the playground because remember, we actually couldn't play kickball anymore. Everybody's kind of mad at you. So now if you tell everybody to go jump in a lake, that's the nice version of it, or you start breaking everybody's stuff or punching holes in the wall, then that's even worse than not being able to play a kickball game. You're instilling fear and terror into these people. Even if you apologize later, well, good for you. That probably makes you feel better. But to everybody else, that left an imprint on them. So to the wall puncher, to the extreme emotionally immature yeller, now your little child is screaming to you, you get to heal this. Go and find help for that. Learn to emotionally regulate. Do whatever it takes because you're now in charge. Even if it doesn't feel like it, you can start to be in charge on the inside. I had one of the most beautiful experiences not long ago with someone that I admire, I care about, I trust. And I think it took that rapport to be able to express to them that one particular moment, they were feeling like they were a bad mom. And they were starting to have these really dark thoughts and emotions creep in. And they said that they found themselves thinking, my kids deserve a different mom. Thanks to the rapport built and the trust in this person, I was able to say, they do. But it's you. It's you becoming a better mom. It's you now learning that this is that little kid in you that is screaming, okay, you now are in this situation. You feel emotionally overwhelmed and your inner child is saying, hey, they deserve us to be different. Not a different mom, meaning I don't need to be here anymore. But now your own inner child is screaming at you, it's time. Let's do this. Let's find help. Let's fix ourselves. Let's learn how to manage our own emotions. Let's learn how to be more curious. Let's break these patterns that were taught to us in our own childhood. And yeah, it's going to take work, but it was a beautiful moment. I felt that moment where she and I were talking about this, and I think she did too. Let that inner voice, that inner child, let them guide us and say, okay, I still want to play kickball. I can be a good mom. I can learn how to do this. And unfortunately, our parents, bless their hearts, a lot of them, they didn't know what they didn't know, and they didn't know how to do it. They didn't know how to help us manage our own emotions, soothe our own anxiety, meet our own needs, find our own joy. But now we have an opportunity to do that. I promise this cliche is so true, but when I can learn to love myself, now I am in, I can love others. But if I don't love myself, now I'm continually trying to figure out, ooh, what do I need to say or do to get this person to love me? Because I don't want to do it wrong because then they won't love me. That's a lot of emotional calories being spent, where if you can learn to love yourself, and it is real, even if it sounds cliched right now, that when I can learn to be okay with myself, when I can learn to manage my own anxiety, when I can learn to self-confront, when I can learn to critically think about myself, when then I can go and do something about it, read things, take courses, go to therapy, and continue on this journey of becoming, I promise you that over time, that implicit memory, what it feels like to be you or me or whoever it is that is based off of the slow residue of your lived experience, does start to change. Those deeply rooted neural pathways start to move in a different direction. Now your default is going to still be what it has been for a long time. And change does not take as long as it took to get you there. That's a completely false premise. I'm 55 years old. It will not take me until I'm 110 to change things around. It'll take some time, but it is much, much quicker, or it can be, than one might think. Now, it's not 3 weeks. We could be talking months. We could be talking in a couple of years, but you start to notice the progress, and that can become empowering. Turn off the wind machine, take the soapbox away. Okay, I've got a few more, but let's go with this one. I might have to do a part 2, or maybe I'll put the part 2 over on the Patreon. So this person said, my ex would invest considerable effort into deliberately choosing inappropriate gifts that I would never wear, creating a situation where he then could claim I tried so hard while knowing the gifts wouldn't suit me. She has a good reason why she knows later, so stay tuned. She said, even though I wouldn't complain, he'd proactively shame me for being ungrateful and regularly remind me of all the supposed work he put into selecting these gifts. And then if I didn't use these ill-suited gifts, then he'd use that as further evidence of my ungratefulness. So it almost felt like he was testing her. I can't even think of to wear some ugly sweater to say, hey, where's that amazing sweater that I bought you that I put so much time and effort into? Because I really did. It was a very important gift for me to send you, to give you, and you don't use it. We said, notably, the only time he genuinely selected thoughtful gifts that aligned with my interest was after I'd already decided to end the relationship. So that proved that he was always capable of appropriate gift giving, but he chose not to do so because that previous pattern garnered him more attention. There's the frustrating part. Because she felt crazy at the time that he would give these gifts and that she would try to be appreciative of them, but it was never enough. Then she wouldn't want to really wear or use the gift because it wasn't anything that she needed or asked for. But then she would continually be told how ungrateful she was. Then she ends the relationship, and now all of a sudden he saw her. And why was he withholding those things in the relationship? So in that case, I think by intentionally choosing the inappropriate gifts, he's setting up a scenario where he can't actually lose, because either he gets attention for his efforts or he gets to play the victim when the gifts aren't appreciated. And then what is so revealing here is that previous behavior wasn't about an inability, but more about a choice. And maybe it was that he became more focused when she said, I'm done. But at that point, they had had decades before. Why did it take that for him to finally say, okay, I'll pay attention? So what have we learned today? As I've listened or read these holiday stories, something really fascinating stands out. That these moments that should be full of joy and connection often become a spotlight of emotional immaturity and showing how that shows up in a relationship or a family dynamic. So when you start to look at all these stories put together, you really see some patterns that start to emerge. And I think this is a key. The holidays can have this way of taking whatever's already happening in the relationship and then turning up the volume. A good friend of mine that had been in part of a business with for a long time, had done very well financially, often said that the people that had a lot of money, or they all of a sudden got a lot of money, that it just made them more of what they were. And this person was probably one of the most generous and kind people I've ever seen. And it just amped that up in all the examples that he had. I can think of people where money did make them more of whatever that they were, and that isn't always in a good way. So I like that concept of the holidays take emotional immaturity and it amps it up in whatever that situation is, turns that volume up. Because there's all this pressure to create these, I don't want to say perfect moments, but really powerful, good connecting moments, to give the right gifts, to be one big happy family. And that pressure can create the perfect emotional storm. It's like all of our deepest hopes for feeling loved and appreciated and connected get pushed right to the surface. And especially those of us who didn't necessarily have the most positive holiday memories when we were younger, desperately want to create those holiday memories when we're older, maybe to our detriment. And I think as you saw in these stories, there are some themes that just keep showing up over and over, because we see how gifts become weapons instead of expressions of love. And we see how these emotional outbursts that seem to happen at the most impactful moments, when kids are around, family dynamics, family situations, and we see how kids' feelings get pulled into these adult dynamics, and kids start to be the emotional support animal. They start to be literally in the middle. And you start to see this fascinating shift between a charming public face and then a very different private one. That is a lack of emotional consistency. So no wonder people start to feel like they are walking on eggshells, because they truly don't know which person am I going to get, the public persona or the one that's behind the scenes, because sometimes I'll get the public one behind the scenes as well. But this shows us how emotional immaturity operates when the stakes get higher, like during holidays when everybody's emotions are already intensified. And for those of you who listen today and who recognize similar patterns in your own lives, I think this is where it does get really interesting, because understanding these patterns, it's not just about recognizing difficult situations, but it's about understanding yourself and what is happening to you in these situations. It eventually becomes all about your own growth journey. Because you know how sometimes you might be sitting there thinking, okay, am I crazy for feeling this way? Well, let me tell you something very important. You're not, and your story matters. And every feeling you have about these situations, it is valid and it matters. And here's what I would like to say is the exciting part. All this learning that you're doing, even through all of the tough things that you're going through, that matters. It is changing that implicit memory. It is becoming part of the slow residue of your lived experience. Because when you start noticing that something feels off during what should be a joyful moment, or when you get that familiar knot in your stomach during holiday preparations, it's not you being too sensitive. That's actually your inner wisdom talking to you, your inner child. It's like your emotional GPS saying, hey, I think we're going the wrong way. Something's not quite right here. And it is completely okay to feel everything you're feeling about these situations. Sometimes people think that they should just get over it or move on, or they're being too sensitive, but that is not how human emotions work. Maybe you feel angry when you remember how your partner made the kids wait unnecessarily on Christmas morning. That anger is telling you something really important about your values or what you believe your children deserve. It's trying to speak to you so you can do something about it. Maybe not right now, but just start to be aware of it. Take that in. Or maybe you feel sad when you think about all those Christmas cards you carefully prepared while being criticized. That sadness is showing you your capacity for thoughtfulness and your desire for a real connection. You do not know what you don't know until you know it. And I know that can sound like a riddle or a tongue twister, but when you really break it down, you think about it, many of you are now just seeing patterns that were always there, but you couldn't recognize them before, or you tried to make it more about you. Why I hear so often, am I the narcissist? And if you're asking yourself that, no, you're not, because you're the one that is asking yourself that, and you're the one that's listening to this podcast, and you've made it all the way to the end almost. And we still have this tendency to, if I can make it about me, I can fix it. If it's not about me, then I might have to set a boundary. I might have to do something for me. And sometimes that recognition of all of this really hurts, but it's actually a sign that you are growing. It's developing brand new emotional muscles. And man, are they going to be sore. So looking ahead to future holidays, I want you to really hear this. You have every right to create new traditions that actually feel good. You can set boundaries that protect your joy, your happiness. And most importantly, you can experience genuine celebration without walking on eggshells. Every time you notice these old patterns, you're not just seeing problems, you're getting clearer about what you want to create instead. Because please remember, you are not broken, you are human, and humans are messy, and they're complicated, and they're beautiful in their growth. And you are so not alone in this journey. This episode alone will reach 100 and something countries and be downloaded tens of thousands of times. It blows my mind to see those numbers behind the scenes, because that's how many people are resonating, especially with these ones that are about the 1,000 cuts. Let me say that again, because I think it's so important. You are not alone in this, and your ability to recognize the patterns, to talk about them, to learn from them, that shows incredible resilience. And sure, we can accept that past holidays probably weren't what you wanted or even deserved, but here is where things start to get a little bit more exciting. Your future celebrations can be different. They can reflect your values, your love, your understanding of what real connection looks like. Because you're not just surviving these experiences, you are learning and you're growing and you're creating something new. And I will tell you what gets me really excited, the fact that you're here and listening and learning. That shows courage, because it takes a lot of bravery to look at these patterns and say, I want something different. That's not just healing for you, but now we're going to start to heal for generations. Now we're going to heal for our kids. We're going to show them, model standing up for yourself. It doesn't have to be very angry and dramatic. You can express yourself. You can do things because you want to do them and they're the right things to do. So you're healing, again, your kids, maybe your future relationships, or everybody who gets to witness your journey toward emotional maturity, differentiation, authentic connection. I want you to remember this. You've got this. You really do. And you're not just walking this path alone. And every step you take toward understanding yourself and these patterns is a step toward true, genuine joy and connection that you may not know what that even looks like right now, but you deserve it and you can find it. And it is going to take time, but you're here. And wherever you're at on the path is right where you need to be. And I'm grateful to hopefully be guiding you a little bit along that journey. That is what this whole thing is all about. Maybe it's not all about the hokey pokey. Merry Christmas, Happy New Year, Happy Holidays, and we will see you next time on Waking Up to Narcissism.